So we have 3 copies of Ocean Dragon Lord KAIRYU Shin, alongside 3 Fish Sonar to search him out. Obviously, he's your win condition of the deck, so you want to maximize on the amount of copies you're running of him. I don't think I need to explain too much regarding those ratios. Then we have obviously the main card of what is your Runick engine, being Runick Tip. Now this card, wait, was that? Wait, did you actually think I was actually gonna go into the good part of the video right from the beginning? Nah, son! This is YouTube. Nobody ever goes into the important stuff right from the bat. You gotta give like a unnecessary 5-minute intro before going into the good stuff. Nah, I'm playing. Don't click off just yet. You can click off after 30 seconds. Look, there are timestamps in the description for every part of the video. So if you want to skip to any particular part, please go ahead and do so. I don't like wasting people's time. Number 2, the full deck list is also in the description. So if you were just curious and you want to see a deck list, help yourself. And number 3, a disclaimer.
This video is for entertainment purposes only. This should not be construed as competitive advice. If you want to win your local OTS, please consult professional help somewhere else.
And now, let's actually get into this. Let's go. So firstly, I'm gonna give a bit of backstory about my thoughts on the deck. Then I'm gonna actually talk about what specific interactions the Runick cards have with the Umi cards, because I think the deck profile will make much more sense if you actually know how the cards interact and commingle. And then I'm actually gonna get into a profile. Now look, I've been playing this deck since it came out about like 5 months ago, back in June of 2022. And it's very fun, you know, I love it. I've heard this is very popular on Master Duel. Not that I play Master Duel, but obviously floodgating your opponent out of the game is very, very entertaining. But as with pretty much any deck, this deck also had its downsides, and it had a couple of recurring issues that kept coming up. And I was like, damn, I really wish I could figure out like some way to deal with these things that keep on coming up consistently. There were like 4 main things that kept coming up. And you know, I've tested different techs, I've tested a couple different builds, and basically this is what I've ended up with. So just to give an example onto how I got onto the Runick cards specifically, one of the main things that kept happening that really started irking me, because it was, I don't want to say it was common, but it kind of was, is when you're going second and you do the technique where you activate a legendary ocean and you normal summon KAIRYU Shin. Obviously, your opponent loses most of their board except for 1 monster. When you're going second and you do this, obviously it feels very nice because you wipe your opponent's board without them being able to respond. Very nice. But you always have to still deal with whatever boss monster they have left. And, well, you gotta deal with it, right? Because sometimes they can just wipe out your KAIRYU Shin, and given that this is oftentimes a normal summon deck, you many times don't have another play outside of your normal summon, except for a few exceptions. You know, that can sometimes just be the end of your turn. I guess you sit 2 or 3 cards and pass turn. So I was looking for different cards to help deal with that situation, because for example, if your opponent ends on something like, hypothetically, a Mirror Jade, they can just banish him before he even activates his effect. Or if they end on any monster with the word negate on it, they can obviously just negate him. Or if it's something like Chichao, they can negate him even before he searches. So I was looking for cards to deal with that situation. Obviously, many builds of this deck play Gameciel, including my own, but that's often not enough because, like I said, there's some cards that can preemptively deal with your KAIRYU Shin before he even does anything. So you can't do this and then try to kaiju them before they do anything in response. So I was looking basically for cards to help me break boards, or at least negate boards. You don't necessarily need to break the board because KAIRYU Shin does half of that work, most of that work, but you do need at least a way to negate their monsters, especially whatever's left. And you know, there's a couple of cards to help you with that, like Dark Ruler No More, like Droplet, and like others, but they all had their downsides. And eventually one of the things I tested was Runick Freezing Curses, because this is basically a Forbidden Chalice, right? You know, if you do this and they're left with 1 monster, you can then Forbidden Chalice them to negate them, and you can freely search and do anything else you're gonna do on your turn. But on top of that, this is searchable by Runick Tip. So that's something that caught my attention, and I just started playing this just as an experiment. And the more I tested with the Runick cards, the more insane I noticed that their synergies were with this deck. So for example, and I'm gonna go into some of those synergies. So many builds play a Foolish Burial Goods package, including myself, but one of the downsides is that you have to obviously run Ice Barrier, and I'm not gonna get into the discussion about setting it and using it in the battle phase. This card, at the end of the day, is a card you don't want to draw. In other words, it is a brick, and 99% of the time. And the Runick cards actually help you unbrick from this card, because all of the Runick quick play spells can be used to summon out from your extra deck Runick Huggins, and when she's summoned, she can discard any card from your hand. Guess what you're going to be discarding? So basically, you already have your Ice Barrier engraved now, which is perfect because that's basically what you want. And now you can obviously banish it, grab KAIRYU SHIN to the hand, and not only that, but if you don't have a Legendary Ocean, you can just use the Huggins you just summoned as tribute fodder to summon KAIRYU SHIN, and obviously he can then search whatever piece you're missing. But basically, what you just did there is you turned a card that normally is a brick to draw into an actual starter, as long as you draw it alongside any of the Runick quick play spells, which is very nice because as it is, Umi plays many what are called engine requirements, cards that you don't really want to draw but you have to run them, like Gem Knight Garnet, for example. And the Runick engine basically turns what would be a brick into an additional starter you didn't actually have before. So that's a very nice interaction. Also, even ignoring that play, if you have any of the Runick quick play spells and KAIRYU SHIN and you don't have access to a Legendary Ocean, you can do the exact play I just showcased, which is basically to use this, summon out any of the Runick fusions, and then tribute it off for KAIRYU SHIN, again, in case you don't already have access to a Legendary Ocean. And at first, I'm not gonna lie, I thought that play was kind of whack the first time I did it, because you're kind of going neg1 when you do that play. But in actuality, it actually makes a lot of sense once you actually do it a couple times, because the reality is you don't really need a Legendary Ocean specifically, like ever. Like, you don't even need to go through that card. You just need this dude on the field, since he himself can get to any Umi card that you need, including a Legendary Ocean. So running the Runick quick play spells basically means that I can actually cut back on the amount of copies of a Legendary Ocean that I'm running, because many pure builds will run obviously the 3 a Legendary Ocean plus a Terraforming plus certain amount of Warrior of Atlantis. And I can't blame them, because the reality is in a pure build you don't really have that many ways of getting him on the field. But the downside to that is that obviously a Legendary Ocean doesn't really have any other use other than to get him on the field, which means that oftentimes it can be a dead draw, because you either draw multiples and you already have access to an Umi, and you're basically just drawing another card that's not doing anything, either another Warrior of Atlantis or a Terraforming that can't search Mystic Mine anymore. Rest in peace. So basically, the Runick engine as a whole gives you another way of getting your main monster on the field, which is crucial, obviously, for consistency reasons. And I really like that because they're very multi-use. You can use them either for that or for one of their own 2 effects, which is very nice when you can have cards that have multiple different uses. So another interaction I like about the Runick engine is with Sea Stealth 2 specifically, because normally Sea Stealth 2 doesn't really do anything for you if you draw it, because it doesn't really get him on, it gets him on the field if you're going second, but he won't stay on the field unless you're playing a certain spell, which we don't do that over here. But for the most part, this doesn't really help you get started if you don't already have your engine rolling. But now it does, because if you're going second, you can activate it, go into the battle phase, summon KAIRYU SHIN off of it, and then use any of the quick play spells to summon off, again, Hugin the Runick Wings. And when the battle phase ends, you can just use Hugin's continuous effect to banish itself so that this doesn't get destroyed. Which means that, basically, Sea Stealth 2 turns into an actual extender, because you can actually summon KAIRYU SHIN onto the board and keep him on the board. Which is very nice, because you're basically getting more use out of the cards you were already running. And the last main thing I want to talk about for now about the Runick engine and Umi specifically is that it actually gives you a good excuse to run a searchable and recursible. Is that even a word? I don't care. A searchable and recyclable a spawn trap out, because normally, and this is what's kind of awkward of playing Umi control, you're kind of not incentivized to run any spawn trap outs, at least not in the main, because your deck doesn't really lose to the main floodgates. Like Goes and Match, TC Boo, There Can Be Only One, Mystic Mine was it when it was legal, rest in peace, and Skill Drain. You can play under all of those. Obviously, Rivalry hurts the most, but you can still play under it. You know, it's whatever. So you're kind of not incentivized to run any back row removal, except maybe like a one of Harpies. But then whenever you are faced against a deck that has like a bothersome field spell or some random continuous spell or trap, you have no good way of outing it unless you know, hard draw your one off out, or you're playing like Nightmare Phoenix and you're not waterlocked, right? Because sometimes you're like waterlocked and you can't even summon something like Nightmare Phoenix out. So long story short, it gives you a good reason to run an MSD in the main deck. And, you know, it's a small thing that makes a big difference. But that's the main things I like about how the Runick cards interact with the Umi engine. Obviously, I'll keep talking as I go through the deck profile. But now let's at least get into the deck profile and show you the card by card. So now for real this time. So we have 3 copies of Ocean Dragon Lord, 3 Fish Sonar to search him out, 3 Foolish Burial Goods, and the 1 of Ice Barrier. So, as I said in the beginning, you really do need to max out on him because he really is your win condition. So you want to see him consistently. But I'm not playing any more copies of Ice Barrier because, like I said, drawing this with any quick play spell enables me to use that immediately that turn. So realistically, running 3 and 1 is pretty much the same as saying running 4 copies of the same card. Because if I draw this and I draw this, you know, in the same hand, and I have a quick play spell, Runick Quick Play, they are both gonna accomplish basically the same thing. So, you know, the second one's kind of unnecessary in that sense. That being said, Foolish Burial Goods obviously does have other uses, like for example, sending Sea Stealth 2 to the grave to get it back with the trap card, Sea Stealth 1. And another thing I like, another interaction I really like, is that in the mid to late games, if you've already gone through your Ice Barrier or you just don't need to use it immediately, you can use your Foolish Burial Goods basically as an upstart goblin. And what I mean by that is that you can use it to send any Runick Quick Play to the grave, and then if you use Runick Fountain effect to draw that turn, or whenever you use it next, you're basically going to get an extra draw off of it because of the card you sent off of Foolish Goods. So after our KAIRYU SHIN cards, I have basically 5 copies of Umi. So I'm not running like a Warrior of Atlantis, I'm not running Terraforming. I'm actually not even trying to draw this card, no cap. The only reason I'm running 3 is because you will often go through 3 copies in the course of a duel because of Jellyfish's effect. And that's literally the only reason I'm running 3. But otherwise, like I said, drawing this and KAIRYU SHIN is almost the same. I know it's not the same, but it's almost the same as drawing a quick play and KAIRYU SHIN, because the end result is that you're gonna get KAIRYU SHIN on the field, and if he doesn't get negated, you're gonna get Umi on the field. Although obviously you're a little bit more exposed to hand traps if you don't already have an Umi. But the upside to that is that, like I said earlier, the Runick cards are multi-use. You know, there's at least 3 or 4 different ways you can use any single one of them, versus a Legendary Ocean, where once you've seen it, you don't really need to see any more copies. So I really like that I've been able to thin down the deck in that regard, you know, and cut out the Warriors and the Terraforming. And regarding Sea Stealth 2, I'm just running 2 because that's just the amount you need. Because there will be some times where you need to have 2 copies of Umi on the field. And if I already have Runick Fountain active, then obviously running 2 of this will allow me to, you know, have 2 Umis at the same time. So that's really the main reason for running these at 2. There is an argument for running the 3rd copy, but I'm not convinced yet and probably won't put it in. So after that are my hard going second cards. 1 Gameciel because it's searchable, and 2 Dark Ruler No Mores. I know some people are gonna find it weird, 2 copies. The reality is anytime I played more than 3 hard second cards, it would just mess up your consistency. Because this deck, and I should have said this at the beginning, I forgot, but this deck is a 2-play deck. You know, there's no 1 card combo in this deck, which isn't a bad thing in and of itself. There's many very, very good decks that have no 1 card plays, but you obviously got to take that into consideration when you're deck building, which is why I'm playing 40 cards in this build, because obviously I want to see the right cards, the right combination of cards as often as possible. But anyways, I used to be playing the 3rd Dark Ruler, and I've tested out with different cards as well. But anytime, long story short, anytime I played more than 3 hard second cards, it would just mess up my consistency. So this is the amount of cards I feel good with right now. So now on to the actual Runick cards. So a quick summary of why I like them, aside from the reasons I stated in the beginning. All of them work going first or going second, which is very nice because if you have a card that, you know, doesn't limit you to only using it in certain moments, that's very good. And when I say that all of them work going second, I mean that aside from the obvious ones, like this one which negates monsters or a monster, and this one which can pop a special summon monster, they also, all of them have the ability to summon Doggy Boy from the extra deck. And if you're going second, you know, you first go into the battle phase, summon this dude, and crash into whatever monster they have, and then you can target to pop any card on their field. And you can do that 3 times if you're running 3 of the Doggy Boy. Obviously, that's if you actually need to go for that play. But that's the point. You can go for that play, or you could do any of the other effects that they have. You know, they are multi-use cards, which is very, very nice. But that being said, this is not a Runick deck in the sense that I'm not trying to like turbo out the field spell to draw cards, and I'm also not trying to deck my opponent out, even though that sometimes will like naturally happen just because you're using them and they're getting decked out slowly, or because sometimes the matchup kind of requires you to do that, specifically when it's more of a hard control stun matchup. The Umi cards are not as good into control and some mid-range decks. Umi's better at combo, obviously because of KAIRYU Shin. Whereas Runick is actually not as great versus combo because it only has 2 like super offensive cards, being this one and this one. They're not even offensive, but what I mean is, you know, they deal with monsters. But they're very nice versus control, versus slower decks. So that's another thing of how I like about how these cards complement the Umi strategy, and the Umi strategy complements these cards in return. But basically, all of them are used as like tech cards, the way you would use like a Cosmic Cyclone or like a Forbidden Chalice, you know. They're just one-off cards to trade with the opponent. And if I feel the need to go for a Fountain play, or if I feel the need to actually deck them out because that's what you need to do for the matchup, then I'll go for that. But otherwise, you know, I'll just use them as 1-for-1 cards to trade with the opponent. So 3 Runick Tip, 3 Freeze and Curses. Like I said, this deals with one of the main things that I did not like about the Umi strategy, which is that when you go second and use the normal summon technique, you still got to deal with whatever they have left. Otherwise, they're just gonna negate or get rid of KAIRYU Shin, and then they're just gonna run you over on your turn. But the other Runick cards, I'm not fully convinced on their ratios. I used to be actually running less Runick cards of the other ones, but when Mystic Mine got hit, I actually had to make some changes because I used to be running a Mystic Mine package in the deck with like Demise and Metaverse. And what I've done is add more of the Runick cards, which are nice. You know, Runick cards are nice for all of the reasons I've mentioned, but they're not necessarily the best cards ever either, because like I just said, they really only trade 1-for-1 with the opponent. You know, the most they'll help you in terms of like gaining advantage in your opponent is with drawing with Runick Fountain, but at the end of the day, you know, that's just random draws. That's not a guarantee. And long story short, I like the Runick cards. I don't necessarily love them in the sense that I don't want to make this a full-on Runick deck. And so the point is, the Runick cards are nice, but since they trade 1-for-1 with the opponent, they're not like unfair. You know, you kind of need unfair cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm still trying to look for potential replacements for some of them. So for example, right now I'm playing 3 of the one that destroys monsters, special summon monsters, and 3 of the MSD. But ideally, I'd rather just run 1 of this and 2 of this, because I just don't think you need more. You know, even though this is nice, I'd rather cards that negate rather than cards that pop, because nowadays negating is often more important than just getting something off the field, because things float, things are indestructible, things are unaffected, things activate when you do this, that, and the other. So yeah. And you definitely don't need all 3 copies of this. In fact, the only reason I'm running 2 is because now everybody wants to run Necro Valley, and if the first one's in the graveyard, then you have no way of popping Necro Valley unless you use like your extra deck or you have another out. But these, you know, if I could bring it down to this, I would much rather like use these 3 slots to put in like another floodgate, like there can be only 1 or skill drain or something similar. But that still needs to be tested and figured out, so I'm still fidgeting with that. So anyways, running those. And the last Runick quick play is a one of Runick Slumber. So I'm unfortunately not running Doom Kraken in this build for reasons, but Slumber does basically the same thing, because if you don't know, or if you already knew, I'm gonna refresh. But when you're playing Umi control, sometimes you want to stop your opponent from attacking you because they're trying to crash their monsters so that they can summon something different. That's the main reason to run Doom Kraken, in my opinion, and that's one of the main reasons to run this, because it basically serves more or less the same function. You know, if you're controlling your opponent and you don't want them to like change out whatever one monster they get to keep on the field due to Ocean Dragon Lord's effect, you can obviously negate their attack. So that's that. I really like it. Yeah, I really like it. And obviously, as a Runick card, again, has multiple uses because you can summon out any of the 3 fusions from the extra deck, Runick fusions. So, you know, it's good. I like it. Now we go on to the engine requirements. Basically, the cards that you have to run for your engine to work, but you don't necessarily want to draw them. So, see Stealth Attack. Like I said, I've been playing this deck for like 5-6 months now. And I've obviously seen a billion other profiles on the deck as well. I can't really tell you that there is a good amount, like a correct amount of Sea Stealth Attack to run. It's really just player preference. In my experience, it's just been that the more copies you have of this, the better grind game you have. Yeah, that's about it. If you only run 1 copy, for example, and that 1 copy gets sniped, you know, Cosmic, or it gets milled by like a Runick card of your opponent or any Shizu card, then you have a very horrible grind game because your 1 copy's gone. So that's the reason I'm running 2. Then Dark Reef. Don't get me wrong, I love this card. Most people that play a deck love this card. I don't know why I say most people, everybody. It feels so good to resolve. But it's so horrible when you go second. Like, you need to break their board and have basically 2 copies of Umi, 1 to send off and 1 to still have face up once you resolve this effect. Unless you're playing Maiden of the Aqua, but that card has its own downsides. But basically, I'm only playing 1 copy for one main reason, and it's just that it's not good going second, period. But also, what I noticed after I cut it down to 1, because I was like, okay, I'm going to cut it down to 1, but let's see if I like it. Let's see if I actually feel the need for another one. What I noticed is that oftentimes, by the time you would need a second copy of this, you're generally at least in a neutral position, if not a good position. And what I mean by that is this. So if you actually resolve the play where you activate this, summon 2 things out from the board, and you still feel the need to resolve this again for whatever reason, it takes 2 whole turns of yours and 2 whole turns of your opponent and this dude not getting negated for that to happen. Because even if you search another copy of this, you still actually need another Umi to be able to use this card effectively. Unless, again, you're running Aqua Maiden, which I'm not. But otherwise, you'd need to search this. And then on the next turn, search either Sea Stealth 2 or Sea Stealth 1. And then you'd be able to actually do this. And by that time, one of two things would happen. Either you were just in a good position anyways, because your opponent's not even stopping your searches and, you're kind of free to do, you've been free to do whatever. Or number two, in this deck specifically, with the Runick cards, is that by that time, I'll actually have had enough time to get my Runick engine going in terms of searching this and having many Runick quick play spells in the grave. And I can actually start getting draws off of it because, it's been a couple turns by now. And usually what ends up happening is that I just draw into the Umi monsters that I have remaining in my deck. So kind of defeating the point of having another copy of this. Then we have one copy of Electric Jellyfish. And I know what you're thinking. Oh my god, he's playing one Jellyfish. This dude's so bad at Yu-Gi-Oh! And you're right, I am bad at Yu-Gi-Oh! But that is not the reason I'm playing one Jellyfish. So, it's kind of similar to Dark Reef. The reason I'm playing one Jellyfish is because he's just not good going second. And let me elaborate. I have literally been in positions where I have these three cards in my hand. I'll activate the field spell. My opponent will be like, yep, you're good. And I'll have the decision to either summon him out directly or summon Jellyfish. And I swear, pretty much every time, I just go for summoning KAIRYU Shin directly. Because I know it's actually at least going to do something. Because it's almost impossible, even if you have Umi, it's almost impossible to realistically resolve this thing's effect going second. Because one of two things will happen. Either number one, it gets impermed, because this thing can't stop trap cards. I mean, there's other trap cards, not just imperm. But if it doesn't get stopped by a trap card, even if you have the negate with Umi, 9 times out of 10, your opponent isn't just going to have one interruption. They can literally use any card to try to negate it. This dude responds, and then they'll just effect Veiler it. Or backwards, they'll effect Veiler, respond to negate, and then they'll negate it with something else or do something else to it. So realistically, I don't see a good reason to max out on this because number one, like I said, I don't like it going second. And number two, I don't really need to max out on it to get this guy on the field because like I said, on top of this and Alo, I also have all of the 13 Runick cards that help me get him on the field. So in terms of, it being a card that I want to draw, I can't say that it is. But you obviously still run the one-off because it's searchable via Sonar and summonable off Reef. And it is a good card and you need it for some matchups. But it's not like I'm trying to open it because the utility just isn't there. So yeah, one Jellyfish. So then we have one Whale. Unfortunately, he's a brick, but I love him because this dude wins you games. Makes it so you don't have to deal with unaffected monsters or monsters with agility and attack. And one Runick Fountain. I'm counting this also as a card that you don't really want to draw. Because like I said earlier, this is not really a Runick-centric deck. I'm not trying to go for like a turn one play into Fountain to draw cards. But you do need to run it if you want to be able to do the play I mentioned earlier, where you summon Hugins and then discard a card from the hand to search this. And not only that, but the reality is some matchups, particularly the control and mid-range matchups, the Runick engine deals with those matchups better. So I'd say this is necessary. You could even make an argument for running 2 of these, but that's something up to testing. But since this isn't a Runick focused deck and most hands I don't actually draw like many Runick cards, I don't really need, for now, I don't really see the need for the second one. And the last 3 cards in the deck are 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity. Now, I swear, one day I'll probably make a rant on this card because it's so dumb. But the reality is, it's very good for the deck. And some of you might have already noticed that obviously this conflicts with Runick Fountain. But like I said, this is not a Runick-centric deck. I'm not really trying to go for a Fountain play turn 1. So oftentimes I can just resolve this no problem. But if you really feel the need to get the draws of Fountain, you obviously have a couple choices. Because, if you're going to use Prosperity that turn, you can just still activate Fountain and get the draws during your opponent's turn. So it really just depends on your hand. Obviously, I'm not going to lie, there are some times that I draw both, or I want to use both, I should say. And it's a bit of an issue. But 9 times out of 10, I don't really need the draws of this immediately and I can just draw on my opponent's turn. Or I'll just not activate Prosperity because I'm about to draw like 3 cards off of this and I already had good cards in my hand anyways. So it really just depends. It really depends a lot on what your hand looks like and what your opponent is doing. But generally speaking, you can just choose either or and then just draw on their turn. So 3 copies of Hugin the Runick Wings, very good against matchups that destroy your cards, obviously because of its protection effect. 3 copies of Doggy Boy, like I said, going second, this makes all of your quick play spells into 1-for-1 trades with your opponent, and it recovers the field spell from grave, so it gives you a good grind game. 2, Munin the Runick Wings. For the most part, you don't need more than 1. But I run the 2 because if I am gonna summon something to tribute it off for KAIRYU Shin, this is the one I summon. Then we have Eria the Water Charmer. Sometimes you need to link off the fusion up top with one of your water monsters for reasons. Mistar Boy, Coral Anemone. These sometimes get summoned, although it's extremely rare. The rest of these I have not summoned in this build of the deck, so it's possible that you might want to, try different things out, because even though, and I want to talk about this, but even though this deck almost never goes into the extra deck, you still want to have cards that realistically might come up. So one Nightmare Phoenix, because I hate back row. This is in case my opponent gives me random level 1 shit, like tokens, like the Dinosaur token or the Destiny Hero that doesn't let you activate spell cards. Fuck that card. And random rank 4s. But I've never summoned them in this build. So now I'd actually like to talk about some of the conflicts between the Runick engine and the Umi engine. There's only one main one and another one that's kind of meh. But the main one that I have to admit does come up is that Ice Barrier locks you into water monsters. And obviously the Runick quick play spells summon non-water monsters. That does sometimes come up, specifically when I'm going second, because there are times when I want to activate Ice Barrier, usually to search Gameciel, although sometimes to also search KAIRYU Shin. And after I do that, I still want to summon one of the Runick fusions, usually Huggins, although, it depends, but usually Huggins. And obviously I'm waterlocked, so I can't do that. So I will admit that is a thing that you have to be cautious with. Dark Reef also waterlocks you, but because Dark Reef can be used on your opponent's end phase or on your opponent's main phase, it's not that big of a deal because once it's your end phase, the lock is over. But Ice Barrier is a little different because if you use it in your main phase, for example, because you sent it off goods or you discarded it off Huggins, you can't do any Runick stuff that turn. You can't do any Runick stuff on your opponent's turn if they try to harpies you, for example. And you still can't use any Runick stuff on your following turn because it's until the end phase of your next turn. Whereas Dark Reef, for starters, if you're resolving Dark Reef, you're in a good position, period. And like I said, also Dark Reef, you can just do it on their end phase. So after you've done whatever stuff you're gonna do in their turn, if you're gonna use the quick play spells. So this card specifically is in a bit of a conflict with the Runick spells. And since you obviously skip your battle phase a lot because of these cards, sometimes it does come up where I want to use this to revive something and I can't in my turn, at least. Obviously I can do it on my opponent's turn unless they just don't want to attack me. But it hasn't been as big of an issue. I'm not gonna act like it doesn't bother me sometimes, but generally speaking, there are workarounds. So that's a bit of an issue, but not as common, I would say, as this one. And overall, the pros of running the Runick cards far outweigh the cons. So I still love how the deck runs. It's just you gotta be attentive to some things. So it has been brought to my attention that people like hearing the reasons for why you don't run certain cards in a deck. So I'm gonna talk about why I don't run certain cards in my deck. Now, 2 things before that. Number 1 is that I purposely, at least in my other videos, try to not talk about why I don't run certain cards because I don't want to discourage other people from trying them out. And what I mean is that just because I didn't find good use in a card doesn't mean you Doesn't mean you. Doesn't mean you. Doesn't mean you. Yes, you. You. Oh, fuck. Doesn't mean that you. Yes, you, the one I'm pointing at right now, can't find a good use out of a card. Maybe I just wasn't creative enough, for example. And number two, just a reminder, I'm just some random casual player. Obviously, there might be other people with differing opinions and different viewpoints. So it's always good to, number one, firstly, in my opinion, test things out for yourself. And number two, get different opinions. And number three, test things out for yourself, because that's the best way, or that's one of the best ways, I should say, to figure out for yourself if something is worth playing or not. Anyways, let's get to it. So, I am not playing Warrior of Atlantis, and some of you might be thinking, wait a second, didn't he already talk about this card during the profile? Isn't this just an excuse to show off his Warrior of Atlantis ulti playset, which he spent his entire paycheck on, and now it's collecting dust in his binder because he's not even playing that card? I will neither confirm nor deny whether that is accurate. But like I said earlier, I'm not playing this or terraforming, mainly because you don't need to, like I said, I really did talk about it already. I just didn't want to, I just wanted to show these off a little bit. But yeah, I don't really need to see a legendary ocean to get KAIRYU SHIN on the field. There's multiple other ways of doing it. And I'd rather maximize on the cards that have multiple uses, like the Runick cards, versus something like this, or terraforming, or a legendary ocean, which pretty much have one use. I mean, I guess you can obviously summon this off of Jellyfish to make it rank 4, but when I used to play this, even that didn't come up unless I had a bad hand. And if I have a bad hand, what I need is something to make it a good hand, not something to make a random mediocre play. So yeah. Ice Jade Tremora. This is actually a good card for the deck, no cap. But the real reason I'm not running her, it's more of a risk-reward kind of thing. It's like the amount of times she actually comes up and I actually need her versus the amount of times that I draw her and she's suboptimal or just useless. Like, it far outweighs the amount of times that I would have rather not drawn her and see something different. Because at the end of the day, Tremora is a neg 1, meaning you lose card advantage just by using her. So that's the only reason I'm not running her. It's just a risk-reward thing, So yeah, just for that. Doom Kraken more or less follows the line of Tremora in that it's a good card, but him specifically, I pretty much never want to open him because Doom Kraken is a very win more. And what that means, or if you don't know, is that he only makes good hands better if you draw him, but he definitely makes bad hands worse. Like, even if you have a water monster on field and Umi, like, that effect generally is not going to be enough to actually stop an opponent. Like, you can maybe slow them down a smidge, but even like with Jellyfish plus this, like, you're not really stopping your opponent anytime soon. And more importantly, this doesn't help you get into your engine. So even if you do stop them, you're still top decking. So it's a good card for the negate attack effect specifically, but it's just not good enough. So unfortunately, and with pain in my heart, I had to cut him. Torrential Tribute and Fury of KAIRYU SHIN. I'm never searching this. I'm not even gonna talk about this. Fuck that. No, I'm kidding. This would only ever come up against a water deck, because against any non-water deck, if you already have KAIRYU SHIN on the board and you're resolving his search effect, your opponent isn't summoning anything at all. So there's just no need for these cards. Unless, again, you're going against a water deck specifically, which is not common. Call by the Grave. There are many good reasons for why you should run this, and I don't have a reason as to why you shouldn't. I just haven't figured out what to take out for it. Because, unfortunately, this is one of those decks where you can many times lose to a single Ash. It's just the reality of how the deck is. I mean, and there's obviously some times where you can play through hand traps, it depends as well. But for now, I just haven't found a good way to put this in the deck, but it is good. Like, I definitely do recommend it. And so yeah, that's pretty much the deck. I really like the synergies between them. This also gives you an alternate win condition in decking people out if you need to go for that. And like I said earlier, you basically have the KAIRYU SHIN stuff for when you're going against combo decks. But against some mid-range and most control decks, you can just lean on the Runick cards to deal with them. So they complement each other very well, those two engines. But yeah, I can definitely say that it succeeds in making Umi more consistent, less bricky, giving it more tools to go second. And overall, I like it, which is obviously why I decided to make this video on it. So hope y'all enjoyed. If you have any questions, you know where to leave them. I will most likely answer because I'm a very obsessive person and I usually answer everything that's commented. And yeah, peace, take care, out, bye.
One more thing.
Konami, thank you for the card game that you have given us. But when you translated this card from Japanese to English, you actually got a typo on it. Because this card should say that the monster is destroyed at the end of that battle phase rather than at the end of the battle phase. And yeah, just please update that in the database or just give us a reprint with the correct translation, because otherwise that can get awkward with certain ruling interactions. And yeah, that's it. Bye out. Peace. Whoop.